This is Podcast Theory.
Hello again, fellow podcasters, and welcome to today's installment of Podcast Theory Live. I am your host, Jason Sircone, and today we've got a special edition of Podcast Theory Live. This is also airing live on LinkedIn and on Facebook on the Bombtrack media page. So if you're watching on any of these outlets, including YouTube, thank you very much. If you're catching this on replay on the audio feed of Podcast Theory, glad you could be here with me today. I wanted to take some time today to talk about a new offering that I rolled out through Bombtrack Media, and it's all about doing podcasting the right way. And I want to tell the story as to how this all came together. But to set the table for what you're about to learn today, I have rolled out a new podcast strategy VIP day. And the reason that I rolled this out, I'll get to in a moment, but the reason that it's in place, I'm thinking about my own experience in almost 10 years in podcasting. And I'm combining that with some of the conversations that I've had with people. And the one phrase that keeps coming to mind when it comes to podcasting, especially if you've never done this before, you don't know what you don't know. That's advice that I wish I had been given when I first started podcasting almost 10 years ago. If you know the story, me and Jason Collins got into podcasting with no planning. We decided to do a show out of spite. At least that was my motivator. I wanted to shut down a troll that had come to me through Twitter. And I look back on that and laugh because we took maybe 2 weeks to put things together. And then we did our first episode. Didn't give ourselves any time to talk ourselves out of it, but also probably could have put a little bit more into the strategy and overall execution of how we were going to build that podcast. But nevertheless, it brought me into the medium. 10 years later, still going strong, still loving every minute of it. But to tell the story of this VIP day, and then I'm going to give you 10 reasons why you should consider, or not even consider, why you should be joining me for a podcast strategy VIP session. I want to give a shout out to one of my clients, Cassie Burkich, who I'm helping develop a podcast as we speak. And we were meeting about her plans and her show and talking about some things. And one of the things about Cassie, and I know she'll be happy to tell this story at some point too, because we're going to be finding a cool way to bring the story of the production of her podcast to life. She was getting in her own head and thinking a lot about what was happening and not fully understanding exactly what needed to happen. And I take some blame on that because maybe in my mind, I thought I was explaining that, but to someone that's never done it, it can sometimes come off a little overwhelming. And in your own mind, you might have a tendency to build things up bigger than they actually are. So when Cassie explained that to me, that's some of the things that I was breaking down for her and giving her timelines on how we would complete certain tasks and put this season of her podcast together, she felt a little bit more at ease. And she told me this is great information and it helps to have these timelines because now I know how long it will take, because she didn't think the production of her podcast could be done in just a matter of days. She was thinking a much longer timeline for that. So this got my wheels turning about the overall process of creating a podcast. And I go right back to that phrase that I mentioned a moment ago. You don't know what you don't know. What I can tell you, and what you may have experienced in thinking about starting a podcast, or even if you've gotten one off the ground, but maybe only did a few episodes, we know many people have unfortunately experienced that in podcasting, is we can get in our own ways, or get in our own way, because we just don't know what we don't know. And trying to figure that out on your own, if you've never done this before, it's a recipe for disaster. I speak from experience. Again, been doing this for 10 years. My first podcast was a great experience. It opened doors. It got me into the medium. There was plenty of boxes that I could check that would say it was successful, but in the overall grand scheme of things, it wasn't the greatest success. It was a success in the learning part of it, but from growth, from longevity, it didn't have the legs that it needed. And I'm fully at peace with that, because again, I look at everything that I'm doing in this space for the positives that can come from it. The fact that it pulled me into the podcast medium and got me started, I will never regret that. As you embark on this mission, on this journey, on this venture to create a podcast and bring something special to your audience, to me, I feel that there needs to be more voices that are coming your way, letting you know that it's not an easy task. It requires an unwavering commitment to doing this the right way. It requires the right mindset, going into this understanding that you're not going to get the Joe Rogan payday and the largest audience in the world overnight. Try as hard as you may, the world does not come flooding in just because you press record and put a podcast episode out there. You have to earn your audience trust. You have to build up your credibility. You have to put consistency into the effort day after day, recording after recording. As you do that, you put in the reps, you get better at what you're doing. Your content by default gets better. It becomes more engaging. It becomes more of a tangible product that people want to not only consume, but share with others. That's where growth starts to take place because people hear your message. They're impacted by what you have to say, by what your guests have to say, by the conversations that you're having. And overall, when they hear this content and they feel as if it helped move the needle for them, they are much more inclined to tell the person next to them, you need to listen to this podcast. I've been learning a ton. It's entertaining as hell. Whatever your motives and your goals are with your podcast, as you get better at what you're doing, it's easier to turn to others and say, or it's easier for your listeners to turn to others and say, you need to listen to this too, because you are going to feel the impact just like I have. So this requires a plan. It requires a strategy. Now, again, thinking back 10 years, I just dove in the pool and I taught myself to swim as I was sinking. And fortunately found a great way to first tread water, but then I was able to do the backstroke and eventually we were doing like can openers and cannonballs off the high dive. But the point I'm driving at is I wish I would have had somebody that I could have turned to. And if I would have done my due diligence, probably could have found that person. But if someone with 10 years of experience would have heard what my plans were for this podcast, they probably would have slapped me in the face and they would have said, slow down. Let's look at this for what you really want to accomplish with it. Get the idea of doing it out of spite out of your head and think about what this could be and how you could build an audience from it, how you could build your own credibility, build trust with listeners, ultimately have an asset and a resource in your arsenal that can be utilized for a number of different things. So with 10 years of experience under my belt, this is what I'm looking to bring your way through the Podcast Strategy VIP Day that I rolled out. And this is the great tool. This is a great tool for you if you're looking to start a brand new podcast, or if you've launched a podcast and you're looking to make improvements, or maybe you pod faded, you've got a show that's sitting on the shelf, but you'd like to knock the dust off it and resurrect, bring it back to life, start getting more from your podcast. It's all about having the right strategy in place. It's about building an infrastructure that allows you to succeed. It's about building realistic expectations for not only what you want to accomplish with your podcast, but for the amount of time you have to dedicate to doing it right. That's a factor that I feel many aspiring podcasters don't consider because perhaps they heard some guru on Instagram or on TikTok tell them you need to be doing 3 or 4 episodes a week to be successful at this. Bullshit. You need to factor in your own time so you can stay engaged in the process and not get burnt out. If you don't think about these elements on the front end, they're going to catch up to you because you may come into this gung-ho. And I know the energy that you might have, I know I've had it too. When you start something new, it's through the roof and you think you're going to take over the world with everything that you do and you're dedicated to making that happen. But once the work starts, once you get in the trenches and you really start grinding things out, if you're not seeing the immediate payback on all of that effort, sometimes it can screw with your mind a little bit and it can cause you to start to say, you know what? I'm going to back off my podcast a little bit. I need to put my attention elsewhere. All of a sudden, this podcast that you were so excited to create and bring to the world moves more and more and more down the priority list to the point where it eventually burns out. You burn out, the podcast burns out, and it goes away. And you never really experience the breakthroughs that you could have if you came at this with the right mindset and the right strategy. So the Podcast Strategy VIP Day is designed to help check all of the boxes to give you just an incredible blueprint for what you need to build a podcast and take it from idea to execution, but then continue to build on it episode episode over episode, season over season. My approach, especially for a new podcaster, is to start with seasons. Do something small, do something manageable, do something that allows you to experience what podcasting is all about and how it can impact your brand and impact you as the creator. Trying to take on a full-time podcaster's schedule when you've never done it is like taking on another full-time job. Do you have time for that in your life? It's crazy to try to add all of these tasks and responsibilities to your plate because it's not just about the podcast release itself. There's a lot of prep work that goes into each episode. There's a lot to do in regards to getting ready for your interview, finding the right guest, making sure their expectations are clear of what you want to accomplish. Once you get past that and you do the interview and things go great, now you've got all the post-production responsibilities, putting that episode together. Then you've got to promote it. Then you've got to release it. Then you've got to market it once it's live. This can all work, but you can't just half-ass it and throw it all together and expect it to all churn out great things for you if you don't have an infrastructure that shows how to bring this all together and how to do things efficiently. That's what the VIP day is going to bring to you, because we are going to spend anywhere from 6 to 8 hours putting together your strategy for a podcast season that you can utilize for your brand, for your business, for anything that you want, even if you're just doing it as a standalone project. This is something you should have a strategy for, because if you don't, more than likely the wheels are going to come off and you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. The goal is to start with a season, but then build upon that and be engaged with the process. Utilize that content for everything that it can be, but get engaged in the podcasting process and use it to your full advantage. I'm going to show you the system in which you can make that happen from start to finish. So we will literally come into this VIP day with your ideas and some rough, broad strokes of what you want your podcast to be. By time your VIP day is done, the only thing that you will have left to do is press the record button and bring your podcast to life. We're going to cover every aspect from the idea, of course, but the content that's most important to building that foundational season, or your comeback season, if you will, if you're bringing a podcast back from being on the shelf for an extended period of time. We're going to cover branding. We're going to cover marketing, your launch strategy, which is incredibly important to understand. We're going to be talking about the mindset that goes into doing this the right way. You have to have those clear expectations and clear goals in mind, or else things are going to get lost in translation. So let me give you 10 reasons. As if I haven't already broken this down enough, let me give you 10 reasons why it's a good move for you as an aspiring podcaster, or even as a seasoned podcaster that wants to take things to a new level with your show, to join me for a podcast strategy VIP day. Number one, you've never done this before. So if you're brand new, you want to start a podcast, you're hearing someone like myself extolling the virtues of how great a podcast can be for your brand. If you've never done it before, you can't expect to get everything right. If you're doing anything for the first time, you can't expect to do it 100% correct. I'm not guaranteeing that even after we do this strategy day or VIP day, that you're going to get everything completely correct. But we're going to have all of the right pieces in place to get you as close as possible. But we know, listen, perfection is unattainable, to quote Tin Cup. But we have a lot that we can work on together that's going to bring this together. And you're going to have a partner that's been doing this for almost a decade. So think of that experience and think of where you're at, knowing that this is brand new. There's probably a lot of questions. There's probably a lot of things that you just don't know. As I've said, the phrase of the day, you don't know what you don't know. This strategy session and this VIP day is going to give you everything that you need, including answers to your questions. It's going to give you all sorts of tools, tips, strategies, even commentary and stories from my past, where I can share experiences that have worked and that have bombed. That way you're not making the same mistake. So if you've never done this before, the Podcast Strategy VIP Day is a great place to get started. Number 2, you want to start strong, but you don't know where to begin. And this is oftentimes something that we all struggle with. We're looking to begin a project, begin a new venture, but what's the first step? To quote an old cliche, the greatest journeys all begin with the first step. I'll probably botch that phrase, but nevertheless, you get my point. You have to start somewhere, but with a podcast, there's a lot of moving parts. So knowing the best place to start may not be in your mind right now because there's probably a lot of information being thrown at you. So the idea with this VIP day is to bring clarity to your efforts so we can examine what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, why you want to do it through the podcast medium, and then build out a plan that shows you how to get started the right way and ultimately guide you towards success, growth, and longevity in the podcast space. So if you're not sure where to begin, a VIP day is perfect for you. Number 3, you want to improve or reboot an existing podcast. Now, like I said, this is not just for starting something fresh from the ground. You may have a show that you've done in the past that ultimately didn't get you the results that you wanted, or you were just trying to do the ready, fire, aim approach and see what happened with podcasting or dip a toe, all the BS that could potentially bring somebody into the medium, but not lead to the long-term results that you're looking for. So what I bring to anybody with this VIP day, whether you're new or seasoned, is an opportunity to get things in order. And if you've got content that's already existing, you can make improvements and changes just by knocking the dust off and coming back to your audience with the right approach and letting them know this is what you can expect going forward. We may have been gone for 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever the case may be. If you're proud of the content that you have already created and it's living there, just point people back towards it to get things resurrected, but also set the table for what's coming next. So we're going to build a strategy in this VIP day that allows you to knock the dust off and allows you to bring that show back to life and then start to get it to the points of success that you had originally plotted out when you launched that show in the first place. Number 4, you value your time. As I've said, time is the biggest factor that gets overlooked so often with podcasting. You cannot commit to this full-time schedule if you simply don't have the time in your planner, in your schedule, in your day. You've probably got a lot of responsibilities on your plate. I'm making a very wild assumption with that, right? Trying to bring podcasting into the mix cannot be something that gets shoehorned in. It has to fit seamlessly. It has to be something that you can take a few minutes, a few hours, whatever the task calls for, out of your day to execute appropriately. If you are trying to just wing it, you're trying to just shotgun off content just for the simple fact that you have to get something out there, that's not going to do you any justice. It's not going to do you any good because your audience is going to feel that. They're going to know that you did not come at them with your A game. They're going to know that you are not fully prepared to give them what they showed up for. And you know what happens then? They say, screw this, I'm out, and they go find somebody that does do that. If you want to do this right, you have to factor in your time first and foremost. This is why I am such a proponent of doing seasons, because it keeps time front of mind. It allows you to build content in a way that is very tightly focused. You can zero in on a certain specific specialty within your business, within your brand, within your practices, and you can create 5, 6, 7, whatever the season ends up being, number of episodes. And then you have this resource in place that you can point people towards, that you can utilize for discoverability, that you can utilize for content across your social media and your digital footprint as a whole. But your time isn't wasted trying to come up with content just for the sake of coming up with content because you have to get an episode out this week. Do a season, take a break, recharge, formulate some new ideas, come back for a second season. If you value your time and you want to use it appropriately when it comes to podcasting and everything else you're doing in your world, come to me for a VIP day and we're going to talk about how time is going to work for you and not against you. Number 5, you want to be on the right side of the statistics. The stats behind podcast longevity, retention, whatever term you want to apply to it, suck. They're bad. It's incredibly unfortunate. There are so many podcasts out there that are listed on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, you name the network, that have 3 episodes, 5 episodes, 8 episodes. I've said it a few times in other settings. If you could, or if I could bottle the energy that somebody has when they're bringing a new podcast idea to life and then sell it, I could retire to an island tomorrow and you'd never see my face again. Now you probably would. I couldn't give this up. It's too much fun connecting with you guys. But the point is, the energy is usually through the roof when somebody has this new idea. But once they get into the trenches and start doing the work, it starts to get a little less sexy. This is why it's important to bring the right mindset to your project, to doing this in a way that keeps your time in mind. It doesn't lead to the burnout factor, but does not lead to that, you know what? I'm done here. I'm not seeing immediate results. I'm not seeing a huge audience growth. There's just not anything happening from this. I'm done. And I don't know if that's exactly the verbiage in somebody's head, but I have to believe it's similar to that, because if it wasn't, there wouldn't be so many shows out there that only have a few episodes and then just dropped off the face of the planet. You don't want to be on that side of the statistics. You want to be in the group that is actively producing new content. You want to be in the group that is bringing value to your audience and to the podcast universe as a whole. There is still so much room for growth and so much room for you as an aspiring podcaster, or as a podcaster that might want to knock the dust off an old show to bring their show back. There's so much room for that, because I just shake my head when I hear people say that the podcast world is oversaturated. No, the podcast world, the podcast platform is not oversaturated with active podcasters. It's oversaturated with podcasters that didn't go beyond 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes. You need to bring the right mindset to this in regards to how you're going to create content, stay passionate about that content, and change the lives of people that find that content. If you're building your show around something you're passionate about, then that becomes much easier. It practically becomes the default. So you have to think about this before you ever press record. And this is something that we cover heavily in the Podcast Strategy VIP Day, because to me, this is where it begins. Understanding what those statistics mean, but more so understanding what you want to create. When you have a better understanding of what you want to create, that's going to allow you to target the right listener, to create content for that specific listener, but keep yourself engaged in the process. This is how you end up on the right side of those statistics, and that's what we're going to cover in this Strategy VIP Day. Number 7, you want to simplify the overall podcasting process. And as I said, podcasting has a lot of moving parts, and if you're not understanding what those moving parts are, things can get lost in the shuffle. And when things start to come unglued, it's only a matter of time before the whole machine falls apart. So understanding what the process is and how you can simplify certain aspects of it is a huge part of this VIP Day experience. Getting these tools and understanding how to put them to work for you is not going to just lead to a successful launch of your podcast or reboot of a podcast, but it's going to lead to the long-term success that keeps you engaged in what you're creating and building upon the content season over season, episode over episode. As you do that, not only do you continue to impact your audience, but you continue to get better at your craft. As I said before, the default result of continuing to produce podcast content is that you get better at what you're doing. You become a better conversationalist. You get better with active listening. You bring something to the world that they are enjoying, that they're learning from, and that they're willing to share with others. That's the greatest endorsement that you could possibly get. When someone is so bought into your message and what you have to say, they are telling others they need to consume this content as well. If you're looking for a more simplified approach to this, so you're not wasting time on the aspects that don't matter, but putting your attention where it needs to be, That's what we're covering in the Podcast Strategy VIP Day, giving you everything that you need and removing the things that you don't. Number 8, you want your podcast to effectively integrate with your brand. If you're doing this for business, your podcast can't look like something completely separate. If you want it to serve your efforts, if you want it to serve as a resource that you can use for discovery, that you can use for education, that you can use for communication, people need to understand that it is part of your brand structure. If you're doing something that's completely different, that's completely disconnected from the brand you've already established, you're not going to get the results that you want. Now, if you want to do a podcast that's completely separate from your brand, so be it. But if you want to utilize this as a tool within the business that you're building, a podcast needs to stand up as a pillar in your overall appearance, in your overall brand visibility. The way I'm seeing podcasting these days, and I've talked about this already on the show, on Podcast Theory, on Let's Blow This Up, on any outlet that will give me an opportunity to speak, podcasting is the new social media. And what I mean by that is social media has changed so much that we are now looking at things that are very algorithm driven, that are very ad driven, very pay to play. And that social aspect that once made social media so great is becoming less and less of a thing, because a lot of social media is divisive. We're seeing people argue and die on hills for no reason whatsoever. But why? Why is that? And I don't have an answer to that question. If I did, I'd be somewhere else right now. But you don't have an answer either. And that's okay, because we're still looking for the best ways to keep human communication going, right? I know I am. And that's why I look at podcasting as the new form of social media, because even if it's on a smaller scale where you're connecting with one person in the moment of creating a podcast, you have a guest that's like-minded and you're having an engaging, captivating conversation, you're learning from one another. You're building a relationship. That's social. As I communicate with you in the audience, that is social. That's what this is about. You know, you're listening and watching a real human being, not some bot, not some AI generated whatever person, thing, whatever. It's human interaction as it was meant to be. That's what podcasting brings to this. And if this whole thing does not integrate with your brand and give people an inside look at who you are, what you do, and how you're going to help them solve a problem, it's not going to work for you. So you can have a podcast where you might talk about something for an episode that's a little more fun, a little bit more off the cuff. But for the most part, your podcast has to tell your brand story, and it has to give people another outlet for connecting with you. And there are plenty of ways to do that right. That's what we're going to cover in the VIP day, because it's so important to get this part right. If your podcast, even like your art, your cover, does not align with your brand, it can be a little difficult, sometimes very difficult, for someone to make the connection that this is your brand bringing them this information. Website, social media, podcasting. That's been the timeline. Websites were irrelevant. Oh, I don't need one of those. I've got a phone number. I've got ads. I've got billboards. People know that I exist. They'll call me. Until everybody else got a website. And those people that were resisting said, okay, I better get a website. Then social media came along and everybody said, oh, I don't need that. I've got a website. Well, then when everybody started playing on social media, everybody that resisted it had to get there. I firmly believe podcasting is that next thing. If you're not thinking about how you can integrate podcasting into your brand strategies, you absolutely need to start thinking about it today. That's what I'm going to cover in the VIP day. Why is this so important? Because it is the next wave. It is the next thing. This is going to be the next pillar that people say, I should have done a podcast a long time ago. All of my competitors, all of the people in my industry are using podcasting to communicate with potential customers, with current customers. I need to get on that bandwagon too. Doing it now is going to serve you much more than waiting 6 months, a year, whatever it may be. Getting on board with this today is going to make life a lot easier in regards to communication, and it's going to give you this new layer of social communication that you've never had before. Number 9, you need an infrastructure and you need a system to keep your podcast running smoothly. This to me is where it's at in regards to keeping a show going. If you don't have an infrastructure, if you don't have something in place that helps you access the right tools, keeps you on schedule, has a framework for communication with guests, for laying out the expectations that you have for them, for even finding the right guests, for producing this content, for keeping everything running smoothly. If that infrastructure is not in place, this is not a real thing. It becomes more of a hobby than anything. The infrastructure will allow you to look at exactly what you need, have the right tools in place for your specific needs, goals, and expectations. And building that before you ever start is an incredible piece of this puzzle, maybe the biggest. A well-oiled machine is going to do much more for you, and it's going to keep you on track so you can look at perhaps what you want to produce over the course of a year, but then also, how is that content going to be utilized throughout your marketing processes, your marketing strategies? How can you pull from the podcast content and utilize it across all of your digital footprints? Like, check all the boxes with email and website and blogs and social media, you name it. However you're connecting with your audience, you can utilize the content of this podcast to make that communication a little bit more efficient. But if you don't have an infrastructure in place and a plan of how you're going to utilize and extract that content from the podcast, it becomes more of a shotgun approach. And we know that never works. So building out that infrastructure is incredibly important. And that's one of the cornerstone approaches, let's call it the cornerstone and the foundation of this podcast strategy VIP day. Getting that infrastructure built is going to serve you and your brand and your efforts in so many ways. And I'm going to wrap up today with number 10. Very simple. You've got questions. I've got answers. Stealing a line from the old Radio Shack ad, but this is one of the big things that I know. Again, using the phrase one more time, you don't know what you don't know. So giving you an opportunity to ask questions, leaving nothing on the table, giving you a full understanding of what you can expect when you go down this path and bring podcasting into your brand practices. It's going to be a game changer. But I want you to walk away from this VIP day with a full understanding as to why you're going down this path and how you're going to make it happen. If you've got questions, I am here to answer them for you. So booking a podcast strategy VIP day is going to check all of these boxes. Now, over the course of the last 30 plus minutes, I have shared as much as I possibly could. And hopefully, this has generated a few questions for you. So I encourage you to go to jasonsircone.com. Actually, let's back that off. I encourage you to go to bombtrackmedia.com/VIP. And the reason I'm pushing you there is because all the information that I have shared throughout this live stream and the subsequent podcast episode that is drawn from this live stream has really broke down what you're going to learn. But you may still have questions and want to talk about this further. That's perfect. I would love to talk one-on-one with you and explain more about how this can bring success, growth, and longevity into all of your efforts. So go to bombtrackmedia.com/VIP. You can get started from there if you're ready to go. But if you want to talk about this further, please take a moment to book a consultation. We can talk about this one-on-one, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. That is going to wrap up this special edition of Podcast Theory Live. For those watching on LinkedIn and Facebook, thank you for joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, as always, I appreciate you being here. Monday through Friday on YouTube, I will be going live with episodes of Podcast Theory Live, covering various aspects of strategy, tips, commentary, stories, all the great things that make podcasting what it is. Podcast Theory Live is, as I said, here on YouTube, but also the audio format on the Podcast Theory feed can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your favorite podcast listening and streaming apps. I'm going to sign off. Again, if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything to say, anything you need to know about the Podcast Strategy VIP Day, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm here to answer any questions you have. And I look forward to you joining me and us spending a nice 6 to 8 hour session putting your podcast together. Go to bombtrackmedia.com/VIP and learn about all of the benefits you get from this from this podcast strategy VIP session. And I look forward to helping you bring your podcast to life in an explosive fashion. My name is Jason Sircone. This has been Podcast Theory Live. Until next time, good talk. I'll see you out there.